Hello, thank you for joining us for the third and final installment of our discussion of C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man. Today, we're looking at whether it is possible for us to become trousered apes. Mike, do you want to be a trousered ape?
It's not one of my bucket list items. No, I do not.
But hey, look, it means you get to have as much sex, whatever kind of sex you want, with whoever you want, actually whatever you want, maybe even animals. This sounds appealing, no?
All of the stimulus. Yeah, I mean, why not just do mainline heroin and just cut to the chase, right? It's like just get as many heat on units as quickly as possible. That's all what the human condition is about, no more, no less.
Right. This is what we are thinking about today, the human condition. What does it mean to be human? That is really what Lewis's The Abolition of Man is exploring in all three chapters. Before we get into it, we'll begin with our prayer because we are entering into some fairly dark territory here.
Mhm.
Let's go ahead with it. And then people at home, feel free to join in. Come, Holy Spirit, divine creator, true source of light and fountain of wisdom, pour forth your brilliance upon my dense intellect. Dissipate the darkness which covers me, that of sin and of ignorance. Grant me a penetrating mind to understand, a retentive memory, method and ease in learning, the lucidity to comprehend, and abundant grace in expressing myself. Guide the beginning of my work, direct its progress, and bring it to successful completion. This I ask through Jesus Christ, true God and true man, living and reigning with you and the Father forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
Now, quick overview of the whole book. Mike and I have covered the first two chapters. You can go back and watch those episodes if you missed them. But essentially, the three chapters are set out like this. In chapter 1, Lewis explores the concept of men without chests. And he says that there is a kind of mainstream project working through education, entertainment, and journalism, or the media, to try to silence the voice of our consciences. He also explores this as the idea of the Tao, so this correct way to live life that goes across all cultures universally. He explores this in a bit more detail in chapter 2, pointing out that it simply doesn't apply to non-rational animals, the brute animals. Those are amoral. It makes no sense to apply moral categories to them. Only men can be moral or immoral. And now we get to the really interesting territory. Is it possible to abolish man? Could this project succeed? Could people become so blinded to the idea that there really is a right and a wrong way to live that they forget all about this element of human nature that separates them from non-rational animals? So to reject the Tao is to reject human nature, becoming merely a clever monkey. This is why this stream is titled Trousered Apes. And Lewis saw prophetically, I think, in the 1940s when he wrote this, that human nature will be the last part of nature to surrender to man. And that really is the culmination of the Enlightenment project of making man masters and possessors of nature. Because, Mike, how could you ever seek to master nature without also mastering human nature? How would this
Mhm.
work?
Right. Yeah. This liberating ethic that begins with wanting to liberate ourselves from the external world, it eventually turns in on itself, and it becomes an ethic of wanting to liberate ourselves from our own internal human nature and our own consciousnesses.
Yeah, what is the root of this, really? We looked at revolution and counter-revolution with Plinio de Oliveira, and we saw that it's metaphysical,
Mhm.
ultimately. The Enlightenment project is metaphysical. And
Yes.
some people listening might be thinking, what? You're telling me that a trans person wanting to become master and possessor of human nature to the extent that they can just decide by an act of the will or by fiat that they are now the opposite sex, and they really truly are. not just in the way they refer to themselves linguistically, but they really are a woman. Mike, okay,
Right.
you got it. You understand that a trans
I
woman
do.
really is a woman, and you better not say otherwise. Otherwise, you're a bigot.
There you go.
Now, how does that have its roots in anything metaphysical?
Well, foundationally, this is the creature trying to be creator. This is rather than recognizing the objective world and the objective features of the God-given world and of logos itself. It's a uh, self-generated uh, self-generated ethic that runs roughshod over all, or attempts to run roughshod over all of those features.
This is to push the point even further. Going back to that idea that the roots of liberalism ultimately are in this idea of the will and placing the will above logos, which is what Satan did in his rebellion, refusing to be subject to the divine hierarchy, seeing whatever he willed as the right thing.
Mhm.
Now, people say, oh, can't we just turn back the clock a bit and have a little bit of mastery of nature and not quite get to trans? Like, there was a moment when liberalism was good. It's a good idea, whatever
Right.
we will. Can't we turn
Mhm.
back the clock a little bit and just be happy there?
Yeah, I think it's a paradigmatic difference between natural law and, as we've talked about before, a kind of writ large Whiggism or Hegelianism with regard to history. And once you accept that latter paradigm, that there is this inborn telos to the unfolding of history towards greater and greater egalitarianism, then once you're on that train, it it doesn't stop, and you can't reverse directions or pause it. It's just more and more liberalizing and more annihilation of what it is to be human, and we're seeing it now, picking up even more speed. So the idea of being able to roll things back to 1993 or something is it's not the right terms or conceptual framework to be thinking in terms of. It really is natural law versus Hegelianism / Whiggism. That's the two conflicting paradigms.
For sure. And even thinking that it has its roots in 1990, Jolivera and others point out, is to seriously misconceive it, because you're going back to at least the French Revolution. And this thing
Mhm.
has been gathering steam for a long time. And ideas have consequences, as Richard Weaver put it in his classic study by that name. And what we're seeing here is that the desire for autonomy and the placing of it as the supreme good has the inevitable consequence of some people also desiring autonomy from biology. And that's all trans is. They're just being
Mhm.
well behaved, logically consistent liberals.
Well, I think that this is, as we might have mentioned before, this false understanding of what's going on demonstrated itself in an exchange between Paul Grogfried and James Lindsay last week on Twitter, where Lindsay was saying that trans, etc., is an expression of the neo-Marxist Frankfurt School academics subverting things, whereas Gottfried was saying, no, this is much more of a downstream feature of liberalism itself, taken to the very next level, autonomy from even biology, as you said. So I think it becomes that to me, that latter explanation seems far more explanatorily powerful than merely the idea that some pissed off academics invaded the ivory tower and subverted it back in the 60s.
Yeah, exactly. There's another book on this that I've looked at, Remy Brague's Kingdom of Man, Genesis and the Failure of the Modern Project. You heard of that one before?
No, I haven't.
That's 2018.
Mm.
So he has a really similar critique of the whole project of modernity. It's got some good parallels to Lewis, although he doesn't reference Lewis much. He
Mm.
argues, this is like his main thesis, the project by which man should dominate nature leads back to the effacement of man. And we'll be looking at that concept in some of our Lewis quotes coming up. And he talks about how this is rooted in the Enlightenment. And there are similarities with Lewis there too. But crucially, he says that it begins in resentment. And the ultimate resentment is against God. And the Enlightenment project seeks to match or outdo God. So his description is that the modern project entails a rejection. That which it expels, it puts into the category of the Middle Ages, understood as empty and willed as such. A universal trash can, always open to new contents, which even if they appear during modernity, are denounced as marking a step back vis-a-vis the project and thus as medieval remnants. So, we're familiar with this, the Dark Ages, and before the Enlightenment, the name itself is the clue. Nothing really matters. This is the age of superstition and irrationality and darkness and ignorance.
And
but ahead, bright future, right?
Bright future. During that time period, egregious human rights violations, etc. Yeah. So there's
although, funnily enough, no pregnant men back then, Mike, in the Dark Ages.
That is a good. That is a good observation. No pregnant men. So yeah, it's a very anomalous feature of the Enlightenment modern project that was not similarly was not a remainder left over in the classical world.
And he describes Bacon's experiments as fantasies, truly, and says that the rise to prominence of the idea of this project of modernity is connected with the displacement of emphasis from reason to imagination in the definition of man, henceforth understood as the living being capable of conceiving possibilities. Now, this is really important for thinking about the trousered ape, because although it pretends to be focused on rationality, what the Enlightenment project has really lost is the definition of man as the rational animal, as the Aristotle's tradition puts it. So what does it mean to be human? Not many people can actually answer that question clearly today. What kind of answers do they give?
Well, I mean, from the Enlightenment, you would have had a Lockean tabula rasa view. So we're just a blank slate that gets chucked into the world without any familial or cultural or religious context. Hobbes would have seen us as first and foremost being bestial animals in the state of nature that require the generation of a social contract and the subordination of ourselves to the Leviathan in order to prevent a war of all versus all. So our human nature is fundamentally red in tooth and claw. Kant would have recognized us as, or seen us as, some kind of disembodied intellect, much like Descartes. Similar to Locke, is just not having any grounding in any familial or teleological sense of personhood. And then obviously, like, the seeds of this brought up to the 20th century, you see this with folks like Russell or Julian Huxley wanting, and now Harari and company, the transhumanists of various forms, wanting to transcend man via science and create some sort of transhumanist Uberman that is superior to us in some regard.
Exactly. And that's what I like about Brague's book. And I think he fleshes out in a bit more detail than Lewis does what that truly involves. Because he says that, ironically, actually, emphasis on the dignity of man is only one of the themes of modern thought. There's also an entire tradition bent on belittling him. And he locates the origins of this in, well, not really the origin, you could argue even the culmination of it in Nietzsche's Zarathustrian saying, man is a thing that must be overcome. And this is basically a license to kill, in a sense. We've got to overcome him by killing him. We want to be able to create ourselves. The overman is the man who's going to kill man. And you could even argue that, like, the trans man is the overman. Why not? He's the self-creator.
Yeah, and yeah, that's I hadn't thought about that. I've always thought more the trans man as the last man, but yeah, he could be the overman ethic in the sense as well. Yeah, he's trying to transcend all of his God-given natures and the teleological functions.
Yeah. I mean, what greater power than just to say, I am a woman. That's it.
And whatever woman is whatever I say it is.
Yeah.
And all institutions, past, present, and future, will now pivot around my moment by moment subjective prerogative. I mean, that's powerful.
Yeah. This is a hell of a flex, isn't it? That's the overman.
It is, yeah.
So trans women are like the ultimate Nietzsche bros, and people have just missed it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is a profound connection.
So the other irony Lewis points out is that what we call man's power over nature turns out to be a power exercised by some men over other men with nature as its instrument. Now, tell me a bit more about your reason for selecting this quote. The some versus the many. This is very much a feature of the elite planners, isn't it? And people might have read something like Brave New World. And you can see the idea that you've got the people behind the scenes who have a vision they want to bring about.
A vision they want to bring about, and it's not one of love thy neighbor. It's not one of humility with respect to one's own position in the universe or within God's hierarchy. It's we are the new utopian designers of a better future, and we're the elites, and we have the instruments and the institutions and the institutional powers to bend the world into this utopian vision. And then the question is, well, what are we going to do with like all the other people? You know, what are we going to do with them? And you even have seen like Harari at the WEF has said something to that effect. Is like, well, you know, we here in this room, like, we're going to be all right, you know, as we design the transhumanist future. But like, what are we going to do with all these other people? You know, we gotta give them something to do. And it's because, you know, this is they've already designated themselves as the self-appointed saviors of the universe. So they're in a different category than like the common man that's in the way and needs to be managed.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you can see the idea of the pride involved in trying to take the role of the creator, because what they really want to do is remake man in their image. That's the heart of the project. They've got a kind of blueprint that they think human beings should become and want to bring it about. They're the architects of it. And it's also not only a left-wing phenomenon. You can see it on the non-Christian right as well. Like with Bronze Age pervert saying that the key to the meaning of the life is really the secret desire to be worshipped as a god, and talks about this will to power vision as well, but just in terms of biological hierarchy and breeding a master race. So you see it whenever you get a non-Christian worldview, the temptation to step in.
Yes, yeah, and to force the populace into these new molds of what the new person is going to look like. Yeah, whether it's the Aryan Superman, the Homo Sovieticus, which the Russian Soviets were trying to create, or new bottles for new wine, as Aldous Huxley phrased it in his book.
Right. And it's because at that point, whether you are on the left politically or on the right politically, there's nothing but the will to power. So it's just a clash of wills and who's going to be dominant in the end. But they're both striving for the same thing ultimately, which is
Yeah.
just the exertion of the will, irrespective of logos or truth.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now, Lewis points out that we may well thank the beneficent obstinacy of real mothers, real nurses, and above all, real children for preserving the human race in such sanity as it still possesses. And I found this one interesting because if you look at the history of failed socialist utopias where they've tried to take children away from the family and raise them in communes like Plato
Mm-hmm.
wanted in the Republic. And Plato's Republic is very much a textbook for tyrants in some
Mm-hmm.
respects, especially Book 5. It's the mothers who have resisted the plans of the male intellectuals. So this happens in the Israeli kibbutzim, and it also happens in the Soviet Union as well. When push comes to shove, the mothers don't go along with the plans set out for them to separate them from their kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost as if there's a natural order to the nuclear family that is inborn and it's built into us and instinctively responds when it's threatened by these artificial higher order institutions or these new man-made institutions.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's correct. And Lewis adds to this thought that the man molders of the new age will be armed with the powers of an omnicompetent state and an irresistible scientific technique. We shall get at last a race of conditioners who really can cut out all posterity in what shape they please. And it's this kind of point that I think makes some commentators think that Lewis takes the possibility of this seriously.
Mm-hmm.
He thinks
Mm-hmm.
that there are powers we have at our disposal, specifically technological ones, that mean this might really come to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts about the idea of the omnicompetent state and scientific technique having advanced so far, even from when Lewis was writing, that this is a more pressing danger than ever before? I know a lot of people think along those lines.
I think it's a more pressing danger, certainly, when we look at where the advancements of genetic engineering and the internet and radical life extension technologies and things along those lines. What's his name? Kurzweil talking about the singularity of man and machine, AI folks. I think So I think there is reason for greater worry. Not that the worry, though, isn't that in principle that they will achieve the abolition of man, but the greater worry is that because of these technological advancements, you're going to get people that are more prideful and more hubristic than in prior generations. That they'll be able to help themselves. Well, now we have these things. Now we'll be able to build the Tower of Babel to the heights of heaven. That we're going to do it this time, and I think that's the danger. Not that they're going to succeed, but that they're just going to be more prideful in their efforts, and
Mm.
that's dangerous.
If you think about how Gramsci, for example, said that it's through education that you have real power here in trying to bring about this project. And then the ways in which social media algorithms and control of the instruments of cultural production, media, schools, universities, the
Mm-hmm.
way in which that has been increasingly concentrated in
Mm-hmm.
the hands of the elite trying to shape us.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are, if not differences in kind between now and the past, but certainly huge differences in the degree of power they're able to wield.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that in terms of the degree, the scope, and degree of power and evasiveness of these new institutions and technologies. But as Lewis points to in the latter half of this essay, the the lies and contradictions and resistance to the to the Tao, to natural law, it's not just something that can be imposed upon the many by the elite few. The elite few are going to, they're subject to this same contradiction and same set of problems that begin to occur when they've fully embraced that as well. So they can't escape. They can't escape the Tao any more than they think than those that, in absence of the Tao being imposed on their education system, can occur. So it's like the poison. It's going to work upward as well as downward, and I think that's the preventative feature in the system, right? Is that you just, in principle, you can't have an entire society based on all lies and all contradictions and all rejection of the Tao. It's just in principle impossible.
Yeah, we'll get on to some of Aquinas' arguments about how we can't be human and not know natural law. And it's interesting that in modern fiction, with Raskolnikov and Ivan Karamazov as well, in Dostoevsky's great novels, both of them have this idea of being the amoral overman who doesn't have to abide by natural law principles and end up insane. Nietzsche, who articulates it philosophically, suffered the same fate. So what it means to try and assault the image of God in us at that level is revealed by them. It does make me think, though, that you see some of the protests against LGBTQ indoctrination, for example, was the Muslim mothers in the street doing it. So there might be a role for women to play in this that men might not be able to fulfill as well. The mothers are there protesting when some of the male academics are just letting it steamroll them.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting, Lewis points out the mothers, and we've seen it historically as well. So Lewis describes this process, and we're just thinking about Raskolnikov and Ivan as stepping outside the Tao. They have stepped into the void. Man's final conquest has proved to be the abolition of man. This is what the book takes its title from. Now, what does it really mean to step into the void? I think this is the point at which we've got the trousered ape, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. It would be the trousered ape, the completely irrational or non-rational, and therefore amoral and non-moral being. And it'd be the Homo sapien minus the sapient part, and that entity, whatever it is, would cease to be human in any regard.
Yeah, the full quote here is that the conditioners are to choose what kind of artificial Tao they will, for their own good reasons, produce in the human race. They are the motivators, the creators of motives. But how are they going to be motivated themselves? I mean, if they've stepped into the void, why one thing rather than any other?
Yeah. And then, at this point, why not flip a coin? Why not use a magic 8-ball as the new moral system that is going to replace the Tao?
Yeah, this is why it can't, in principle, be anything other than a clash of wills. And why would any one be objectively better than another? Nietzsche talks about there being a higher man, but by what objective standard is that man higher? And it strikes me as odd as well that the people with this worldview don't seem to think about what it would mean metaphysically for us to even have free will in the first place. So, well, you're not mere matter then, because matter just obeys the laws of physics. And if you have free will, there's something in you that is immaterial. Why? How do you have that?
Right.
if you can understand things, you need to have an immaterial intellect as well. Where did that come from? So they don't seem to think things all the way through. You just kind of end at this weird point where, well, I've just got free will and the universe happens to exist, and now I'm going to impose my will on things.
Yeah, I'm going to impose my will on things that I don't know, like there's certain like aesthetic sensibilities that might be more preferable than others, but that's at the end of the day, aesthetic preference isn't normative. It's just that it's preference. You know, one's preference of a guy who can like bench press a lot and looks like a Spartan soldier, besting the obese lefty blue-haired person. Well, like, why should that be preferred? Well, because the other guy's the Uberman. By what standard, right? We've erased any type of standard. So at that point, it's just aesthetic preference,
Yeah.
which doesn't collapse. Like, it doesn't generate any odds. It doesn't generate any normativity.
No. Whereas on the Thomist scheme of things, the transcendentals, truth, goodness, beauty, are all ultimately convertible and aspects of one reality.
Mm-hmm.
On this view here, there's no objective beauty. There's nothing really better about Bench Press Bro, who looks like a Spartan statue, compared to the blue-haired obese person who doesn't ever go in the gym. They like to say there is, but really they can't justify it.
And then the subtle thing too, they'll often move to something like evolutionary, like fitness. Well, this person's more fit, but well, by what standard? Like at the present contextual moment, it certainly seems that the bench press bro is losing in the battle of fitness in the present environment. So there's no objective standard outside of the present context to reference fitness to. So that's where even appeals to some account of natural selection, it's still helping itself to some objective, some teleological laden idea that is operating in the background that gets you that objective difference.
Yeah, right. And they'll ultimately fall back on something like vitalism or life. But it's better for survival to be bench press bro. Well, first of all, is it? If you look at fertility rates, etc., is it really? No. And then let's say it is. What's the objective value in survival? Evolution is blind, according to them. There's no telos. Birds don't have wings in order to fly. There's no point to it. They just happen to fly because they have wings.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And then even furthermore, what's the unit that we're considering that is best surviving? Is it the individual? Is it the family unit? Is it the species as such? Is it all of life? So how that gets carved up, and what unit you think ought to go forward and survive amongst the rest? That's completely just an ad hoc preference at that point. It's not. It's there's no other normative resources that we have that aren't ad hoc that give any metaphysical or moral standing to that one unit versus another.
When I interviewed the comedian Jim Bob on this, he was joking about the irony in people who want to say that complete freedom to identify as whatever you want in the multiverse is the only thing that really counts. And you can say like, finally, I am a unicorn. But then the joke is that someone else in the multiverse, in the computer multiverse, can just like press mute, like shut up, or turn you into a fire hydrant or a car or something. And then really you don't get to decide what you are, and people can just shut you down.
That's funny. I hadn't thought of the multi. that's a whole other podcast episode. Transgenderism in the multiverse.
But what I think that really is, it's like the primordial soup that life just came from, the big mush. It's like that's the alpha and the omega. We just want to end back in some kind of mush where you can decide whatever you are. You're just plastic and malleable. You can be one thing one day the next. It's like this horrible twisted version of the primordial soup.
But yeah, but only some special elect speakers get to speak, and then the soup obeys them, and then the rest of the that regard that as not being possible or true, then they're bigots and they get their bank account shut off.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, Lewis has a really profound point here, I think. And he talks about how as soon as we take the final step of reducing our own species to the level of mere nature, the whole process is stultified. For this time, the being who stood to gain and the being who has been sacrificed are one and the same. This is one of the many instances where to carry a principle to what seems its logical conclusion produces absurdity. It is like the famous Irishman who found that a certain kind of stove reduced his fuel bill by half, and then concluded that two stoves of the same kind would enable him to warm his house with no fuel at all.
It's a very Irish phobic quote that I take great offense to.
So man apparently stands to gain, and yet man has also been sacrificed on the altar of possessing nature. I guess that's what he means, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's yeah, man gets what he wants, and what he gets is his own erasure at that point.
That's a good way of putting it. Now, the options then are, on the one hand, either we are a rational spirit obliged forever to obey the absolute values of the Tao, or else we are mere nature to be kneaded and cut into new shapes for the pleasures of masters. And Lewis adds that by hypothesis, as we've been talking about, these masters can in principle have no motive but their own natural impulses. So
Mhm.
everyone has to choose between these two alternatives. There's no way around this. There's no other choice.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's correct. The he has another point too, where he says something like the conditioners, in all likelihood, the conditioners hate the condition. So it's the move to that latter disjunct is it's not just neutral. It's really a self abasement that is going to in all likelihood end in a really bad life, if anything.
Yeah. And this reminds me of right back when we started with Phaser's Last Superstition, which was one of the first books we did for the book club.
Mhm.
And Phaser was making the point that secularism ultimately is an irrational worldview because it can't account for human reason and it can't account for natural law, which after all is just rational action.
Mhm.
So, what you're really looking at here is secularism entailing nature as something that's there to be needed and cut into new shapes.
Mhm. Yep. Humans as well.
Yeah. So we shouldn't be surprised by what we're seeing now after so long an innings for the secular project.
Yeah, yeah. We've had many generations and multiple versions of different ideological conditioners rising to with their new projects to condition man away from the Tao. We've seen various versions of this.
Mm. Now, Lewis's concluding thought is that to see through all things is the same as not to see. He says that you cannot go on explaining away forever. You will find you have explained explanation itself away.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot go on seeing through things forever. The whole point of seeing through something is to see something through it. It is good that the window should be transparent because the street or garden beyond it is opaque. How if you saw through the garden too? It is no use trying to see through first principles. If you see through everything, then everything is transparent. But a wholly transparent world is an invisible world. Now, this is a really chilling way of putting it. And you have been presented with worldviews like this in your grad study of philosophy, there really are people who do want to try and see through everything, aren't there?
I think they try to, or they purport to, but then when you notice, they do suddenly have these strong, uh, super thick moral commitments just bubble up out of nowhere, and suddenly they are very certain about the metaphysical, epistemic, and moral grounding of any number of their activist projects. But then the very next moment they'll be radical skeptics, and when it comes to meaning or nature or the outside world or free will, and so I've yet to meet anybody who's ever lived a self-consistent life, as both purporting and then acting in a way where they're seeing through all things. But it's a good show. It's a good trick, and it can be very persuasive.
Yeah, and profitable. It can get you tenure.
It can get you tenure. It can get you an entire lifestyle of a lot of conference circuits in Prague and in Sydney and in San Francisco, and yeah, you can live a whole lifestyle, a whole way of being, uh, and with a lot of good travel and food options. Um, just keeping this nihilistic conversation alive.
Mm. Now, what you're saying there suggests that really these people can't see through all things. They just pretend to be able to. And at
Hmm.
this point, I want to bring in some of the reasons Aquinas gives for saying that the natural law is ineradicable from the heart of man. So to be human is to know it. So that the abolition of man is impossible in principle. A trousered ape is not something we could ever make of ourselves, because to be an ape would be to be non-rational, but to be a human is rational. This is one of
Hmm.
the reasons, by the way, that Cardinal Manning said that he didn't believe in the evolutionary model of human beings coming from apes. And what he means by that is that our minds couldn't have evolved. He just said, well, why is every ape an ape and every man a man? And there's no in between. There's just a total difference in kind. It's not
Hmm.
like you get an ape that can do a little bit of algebra. It's just none. It's not like you get an ape that can do a little bit of philosophy or abstract thought. It's just none.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's rational or non-rational, night and day, difference in kind, not degree.
Yep.
And this is
Yep.
because each soul is created ex nihilo, out of nothing, by God, and that's what being made in the image of God means. And here's a weird thought. If a frog or a wolf or a tiger or whatever animal you want was rational, it would be human,
Hmm.
even having its body. I, I
Hmm.
don't I don't think that a frog brain could actually support the human intellect. I think you do need a level of kind of sophistication in the brain for
And
God to be
form.
able to
Yeah.
infuse it. Yeah, but still,
Hmm.
like technically, it would be human if it was rational.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. I agree.
So Aquinas goes through a couple of interesting thoughts here, and he says that the precepts of natural law remain in the reason habitually, even when they are forgotten. And as an example here, like a stone um, has the habit of like falling towards the earth, and if you intercept its fall with your hand, it might stop for a bit, but as soon as you take it away again, it's going to keep falling. And in the same way, the natural law can be like clouded in man, especially if you're living in some kind of degenerate culture. But the habit of it is still there in us, even when it is forgotten. And then
Mm-hmm.
he says things like good is to be done and pursued, and evil is to be avoided. These are cognitively self-evident.
Mm-hmm.
And it's trendy for people to try to doubt some of these first principles of morality.
Mm-hmm.
But as you've said, they don't really.
Yeah, they don't really. I mean, they can make a lot of money and get a lot of academic publications. The more absurd and bizarre their moral prescriptions are. And but yeah, I don't think that many of them actually believe what they're saying. It's like novelty somehow gets a regarded as the gold standard of scholarship and knowledge creation and
Mm,
wisdom. And I think that's the perniciousness of it. But yeah, many of these folks, when push comes to shove, I don't think they really believe what they're spouting, or they're
right.
certainly not. They're not living. They can't live it. You know, they can't live that um, absent any type of moral system.
That's it. And that's one of Aquinas' points as well. So taking this idea of man having a natural inclination that is a reflection of natural law, he says that all acts of virtue are prescribed by the natural law. So what this would mean is that without natural law, there's no virtue at all.
Mm-hmm.
This is Dostoevsky's if God is dead, everything is permitted. And it's the
Mm-hmm.
worldview that Ivan and Raskolnikov tried to live out, and that Nietzsche
Mm-hmm.
explored the consequences as well. And all three went insane. So Aquinas' point in a nutshell here would be that if that situation, no virtue at all, is impossible, then necessarily man minus natural law is also impossible.
Right, right. Yeah, that sounds correct.
And people can doubt that and push a long way in their attempts to live as if it's not true. But you end in madness as those three, two fictional, one real show.
Yeah, it also reminds me too of Jay Budzowski,
Yeah.
who, yeah, was on nihilism, where he describes himself as his atheistic, nihilistic days as attempting to rip out the motherboard of his own being, and the further, more and more he reduced, the more and more he kept trying to collapse everything, the more he kept at each level of reduction, he kept finding the signature of God. The further and further down he kept going, until the point where he realized, wait a second, this reduction is just impossible. I'm just destroying myself, and this the signature of God is evident in my own logos,
Yep.
and that's what converted him back to theism and then to Catholicism.
Yes. I was lucky to read his conversion story when I was in my early 20s. That saved me a lot of pain and hassle, that one.
Mm. Yeah,
We
so
need
it's
to
on
get the link to
nihilism, I
that.
believe. Yeah.
Yeah. We need to get the link to that. We'll put it in the comments so people can read it. It's an
Mm-hmm.
important one. Aquinas also makes the point that natural law is the same in all men. And what does this mean? Why is it important? Well, if it is always the same in all men, then it's got to be either the genus or the specific difference, or some kind of necessary property that flows from one of the two. So it would be ineradicable. So for man to be the rational animal, like that's what our essence is. If natural law consists in our essence, then how could we remove it while
Mm-hmm.
remaining human? And that's a flashy philosophical way using Thomist and Aristotelian terminology of putting the point you just made from Budziszewski's conversion story. How can you keep pulling at the motherboard of what kind of creature you are?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
Then we've got the fact that natural law cannot be changed by subtraction, only by addition. So what this means is that it is necessarily wrong to kill human beings. Even God couldn't change the Ten Commandments and take that one away and say, oh, actually, it's okay to kill human beings because it's contrary to
Mm-hmm.
the nature of rational animals. So we can't take bits away from it. And then we go through a couple of points from history which bear out Aquinas's arguments here. And one of them I think is really good one people to think about today, because he essentially says, look, we can see all kinds of societies, and no matter how wicked or how foolish they get, and they're thinking about Romans 1 in the Bible here, and like God giving people over to the darkness of their own desires. If that's what they want, let them have it. No matter how wicked and foolish a society gets, and we get some really spectacular examples in history, like in Rome, for example,
Mm-hmm.
eventually man always comes back to the knowledge of and acknowledgement of natural law. But sometimes it has to get really dark for him to basically admit, okay, this is evil now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, both individually and then collectively, I would say.
Right. And that's your point about how all the sophists maintain their moral sense despite their pretenses not to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We also see a counterattack as well. When things get bad in a society, like we're seeing now with some people saying, you know what, I don't think it is good to have drag queens reading sexualized stories to toddlers. I think that's actually objectively wrong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You see a counterattack, and that's more evidence of the ineradicability of natural law.
Yeah, even the folks that are on the side of the drag queen folks, they're still saying, whether they acknowledge it or not, they're still at least tacitly saying it's unfair that whatever this can't take place in the library, and that's still an acknowledgement that there's some objective ground of morality, of fairness that is being appealed to. They're not saying, well, I guess everything's a free for all, everything's relative. That's your morality. This is our morality, and these things are merely talking across one another. They're actually appealing to some sort of like common ground of fairness.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah, you don't get people just saying, well, yeah, we found the truth out now. Man is wolf to man, and master morality has no kind of binding, like objective force. People can just do what they want, and there's no listening to the appeal of the slaves. It's my might makes right. Nobody actually says that.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep. This just reminded me that I think maybe it was Thomas Bogardus or some no, who was it? Somebody on Twitter recently pointed out. They said it's infuriating to read Hume because Hume he'll offer these just just moments of just devastating counter arguments to his own position, and then just move forward like it doesn't, like it didn't even matter. You know, it'd be like, it's really weird that that I'm a radical skeptic in my library, but then when I play backgammon and drink ale with my friends, it's as if there's an objective world. Or there's another point where he says it's really weird that like the speaking of promises should like those sounds should somehow like generate like normative obligations. That's so strange. It's just like it really isn't. If there's a like an Aristotelian metaphysics and morality, but for him it's he just goes, oh, that's so strange, and then just moves on.
The point that most people are concerned about today, I think, is that it's become so sexually degenerate and decadent that it's a point of no return. All we can do now is just try to enjoy the decline.
Right.
The counter argument to that would be that it was even worse among the upper
Mm-hmm.
classes in ancient Athens and Rome. Like, if you want to see what actual degenerate alpha behavior is, look at what some of the emperors did. To the senators' wives and the children of Rome as well.
Nero.
It's much darker than now, and people still pulled through. The Jews and the Christians became the only fertile communities and rose from the ashes of Rome by just living in accordance with natural law, and things were okay in the long run. But it does seem that God can let societies go to the brink to teach them the hard lessons that otherwise they're not going to learn.
Yeah, that sounds correct. And it's been borne out in history.
Exactly right. So there's plenty of hope to be gained from looking at the past, and ultimately revelation as well, which is that scripture tells us, tradition tells us that these things are written on the heart, and
Hmm.
God's not going to tell us that and be wrong about it, because the whole thing in scripture is inerrant, necessarily so, because of who God is, truth himself with a capital T. So
Hmm.
that's the best argument for the ineradicability of natural law. Right, Mike, it's been a really exciting and intriguing mixture of books we've gone through. We're at the last of the ones we set ourselves. It's been a
Hmm.
long project, but definitely worthwhile. And
Yes,
we're having
yes.
a break now for a couple of months because we've both got some projects that we want to get on with. But we will be back, and we are doubling down on two themes in particular: feminism and Aristotelianism. So we'll be having some more book selections on those. And I hope everyone has enjoyed the episode so far and is looking forward to the next round of books. If you've got any suggestions for things you'd like us to cover, or episodes that you especially enjoyed from this round of Best of the West Book Club, let us know in the comments for this video. Mike and I will be around to answer comments after the show. Thanks so much for joining us. Mike, I really appreciate you as well. It's been a real pleasure getting to talk to you once a week. And I've got more out of the books than I would have done reading them by myself. So I'm very grateful for that.
Same here. Likewise, likewise. Well, this is a great idea, and I would never have went forward with it on my own. I would have just let it fall to the wayside. So yeah, I appreciate you teaming up with me and working through these, and it's been exceptionally edifying to do so.
When we get the time, I think we should do a joint Substack article together, just bringing
Mm,
together some of the core concepts from
yep.
each book as a unified presentation.
Yes. That would be a great idea. Be all for that.
Excellent. Well, it's been a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to the next series of them. Everybody, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again. Take care.
Take care. God bless.